Well, hello and welcome to the 27 Degree with Chris and Nancy. So today we'll be sharing Thea Gilbert's story with you. So Thea is a survivor of domestic violence, and she has graciously agreed to be on our show alongside Hassan Suto, who is the Education and Outreach Manager, and Kayla Machado, the Education and Outreach Advocate and Counselor at the Women's Center in New Bedford. But before we begin our conversation, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Bay Coast Bank. Bay Coast Bank is just right for all of your financial needs. Visit baycoast.bank or call 508-678-7641 to learn more. As always, you can support the 27 Degree with Chris and Nancy by signing up as a patron. Go to go to patron.podbean.com. I've done that 1,000 times. I can't believe I did that. / the 27 Degree, or you can click on the link on our Facebook page. $5 a month gets you a shout out, exclusive content, and sneak peeks to upcoming shows. You can find the 27 Degree across social media, including Facebook, Instagram, and your favorite podcast platform. You can also subscribe to the 27 Degrees Consulting channel on YouTube. So before we get into the story, let's just hear a little bit about the background of our guests. I think that's always a good place to start. Hassan, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Hassan Suto. I'm a licensed social worker. I've been a social worker for about 20 years now. And for the last several years, my focus has been working with victims and survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault.
Thank you.
Great. And Kayla?
I'm Kayla. Excuse me. I'm an education and outreach advocate and counselor at the Women's Center. Actually coming up on my 1-year anniversary next week.
Congratulations.
So thank you. So happy to be here.
Nice.
And Thea, our special guest today.
So my name's Thea, and I'm a medical assistant and phlebotomist for an urgent care clinic.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a mother of 4. I have 4 grandchildren.
Oh my gosh. 4 grandchildren. You look great.
Thank you. And on my spare time, I volunteer to help the Women's Center and Hassan with his outreach and all kind of projects and stuff. I kind of, this is my way of giving back by supporting the Women's Center, because at one time they supported me.
That's awesome. I want to get into your story, but I think we should, for background, talk a little bit first about what the Women's Center does, just for our audience. Just a quick blurb, Hassan, if you could.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Women's Center provides free and confidential services to victims of domestic violence, whether they be male, female, LGBTQ, and we have a child and trauma program that specializes in children. And we have a really great capacity for linguistics. We have counselors who speak English, Spanish, Portuguese, Quiche, Haitian Creole, and Cape Verdean Creole.
That's awesome.
That's really important to know, too. I didn't realize that, actually.
Yeah.
Really great.
So, Thea, you told us a little bit about yourself, but we were highlighting domestic violence, trying to put an awareness out there for people, just kind of what it was. Hassan and Kayla were nice enough to join us on a previous show just to kind of talk about all the types of different domestic violence. And then as we talked, to really bring it home for some people through a story and through a survivor's story. So ease us into that. Tell us a little bit about your relationship and your story.
So, I was a very young mother. I became a mother at 15 years old, and at that age, you think you're living a fantasy, you know.
Of course.
And I guess I would say after I had my daughters, when my relationship changed. It became very controlling financially, emotionally.
Thea, was the baby's father the man that you were in the abusive relationship with?
Yes.
Okay.
We lived together at a very young age. We were doing adult things at a very young age, you know, raising a child. I was still in school. He had already graduated. So he was working, supporting the household.
So you're 15 at the time, and you kind of fell in love.
Absolutely.
Like head over heels.
Yeah, absolutely.
How did you meet him?
In school.
And what was he like at the beginning of the relationship?
It was fun.
Yeah.
It was fun. It was, went through some trauma in my childhood at home, so it was an escape.
Of course.
It was escape. It was somebody that showed me attention, took me out of my norm, and yeah, fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, how long were you together?
Altogether, 7 years.
Okay. And how long were you together before the baby was born?
2.
2 years. So, and then the baby was born and you said things kind of began to change.
Yeah. I think the reality of the responsibilities that we had as parents, because we did it together, like we did it together. He was a dad. I was the mom. I went to school. He went to work. We came home, got the baby from daycare, cooked dinner. We had real life responsibilities at a really young age. And I think the reality of that was a lot of stress, a lot of pressure on us both. And I think the way we dealt with stress and pressure were different.
Of course. So with a new baby, that's like a game changer. Like you're not getting sleep. You said you were still in school at that point. So there's a lot of juggling that you're trying to do to make this all work. And he's working. And tell us about the living situation. Are you totally on your own at this point?
Yes, we had our own apartment. Like I said, we did grown-up responsibility things. We went, but everything then there was that control, that no trust. Like you're young, and things just got real bitter really quick.
Tell me about that. So what was it that first occurred where you noticed that things were going awry, so to speak?
The control, like I couldn't go anywhere. The money, like I wasn't making money. I was still in school. He was making money. The stay at home while he did whatever he wanted. It was just that looking back at it, I thought it was normal. When I look back at it now, it was normal to me.
Well, at that age, you don't know what's normal and what's not normal. And at any age, being a new parent, you really don't know. I remember when I had my first child, I had no idea what was normal, not normal. And it was hard to deal with having a child in my late 20s. So I can't imagine what it would be like at a younger age as yours. So you met when you were about 13 years old then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you're processing things as a 15-year-old too, even though what you had gone through, you had said was traumatic and you may have been more mature. You're still a baby. Like you're still a 15-year-old dealing with all these adult issues, And I'm going to revert back to something that you and Kayla had mentioned in our first show on domestic violence. It's the financial piece. I don't think people realize how controlling that is when you have no outlet for finances. You're dependent on someone, and that talks to that control piece that you said. That's real. So what was your support system like, Thea? Like, do you have close family at that time or friends that were helping you, or what were you doing to manage everything?
Well, I lost a lot of my friends when I became a mother.
Okay.
Yeah.
They were living a different lifestyle than what the choices I made.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I lost a lot of friends then. My parents my dad was in the beginning of his illness. He was sick. My mom was taking care of my dad, and I had a new baby, and it was just survival mode.
It was there.
Yeah, it was just survival mode. I just did what I had to do every day to make it through the day.
And when you were making it through the day, so now your baby's a newborn, and as time goes by, what kind of things change that you're starting to think this just isn't good?
The abuse became more often, became more severe.
When you say abuse, do you mean physical, emotional, a combination of both?
Combination. It was everything. there's no specific type. There's different types of abuse, but if you're experiencing one, you're experiencing them all.
Sure.
You know, it may not, they all may not come all at once. But if you don't get yourself out, you're going to hit those milestones, for lack of better words, of what it is for each and every step of abuse.
You know, it's interesting because a lot of people who think about domestic violence, they think naturally about the physical aspect of it and the physical abuse, but there is that whole other part that's so important and just as devastating, I would think. The emotional abuse, the control, the financial control, the separation of the person from their family and their friends and their support network, all of that. It all seems to be another big part of it that I think a lot of people don't understand. And Hassan, feel free, and Kayla, to chime in at any point if you want to add something to that.
Yeah, I think I would just add that Thea is correct. When we, as counselors and our clinicians, we work with a lot of victims who, have domestic violence, and it falls under the physical category. But based on emerging research, 90% of victims and survivors who are being abused, there is 90% emotional abuse.
Yeah.
So when somebody comes to us and their primary abuse is physical, we as counselors know, well, 90% of those cases, there's emotional abuse.
Once you start going over it with them is when they finally start to realize there was more in it than they thought. You know what I mean?
So,
go ahead.
I'd like to chime in on that. The thing that I experienced is before you can get that person out of that situation, you have to address the emotional damage first. Because if that person's not healthy emotionally, they're never going to leave.
Right.
That's a great point, because so many times you hear people say, why didn't you just leave? And it's like, you're not even there yet. Can you talk about your mental state a little bit and kind of where you were?
Fight or flight. I was never at peace in my mental space. I was never at peace emotionally. It was always a fight or flight. What are we going to deal with today?
Did you realize that fully at the time, or
no? I didn't realize this till years later.
Okay.
Years later.
So Thea, obviously this has been a few years since this all occurred, and I'm curious because this has obviously been a journey for you, a journey of recovery. And I wonder what has been the most difficult thing to overcome. Was it the physical abuse, the emotional abuse? What has been the most difficult on that journey for you to come back from and develop into the person you are now?
The self-destruction.
Tell me a little bit about that.
The after, after the abuse, after the tragedy, after I went on a journey of self-destruction.
And that's common too.
Life didn't matter. I became like a robot as far as I wasn't emotionally stable to be emotionally available to my kids the way I would have liked to. It was the aftermath of it that was the hardest to overcome.
So I'm going to back it up just a little bit. And again, you're 15 years old with a new baby. You're kind of realizing that this is a tough situation that you're in, right? At that age. You said you had how many children?
I had 2 with
this particular man. And what was the progression like? At what point, how did you even think to reach out? How are you surviving day to day? And how did you know about the Women's Center?
I got introduced to the Women's Center after calling the cops so many times.
Were they helpful? I'm not police bashing, but I'm just it's just a question. What was the reactions you were getting when you were calling the cops? And did that
we're here again?
Yeah,
right.
Why don't you leave?
And what
here's
year
the
was
card?
this?
Do you want to put a restraining order?
How long ago was this?
February 14th, 1997. So
Hassan,
25
I would
years
think
ago.
that's changed a little bit because there's been a lot of education and outreach to the police. Do you find that to be different these days?
Yeah, I do find it to be different, and I'm speaking specifically for the New Bedford Police Department. Kayla and I, we're members of the Human Trafficking Task Force, and we've worked with sergeants, chiefs, and lieutenants who not only come to our events, but they've consulted with myself and other members of the Women's Center to try to alleviate the situation, because they started to recognize how we had our former chief, Joe Cordero. He taught Kayla and I a lot about how prevalent domestic violence was and how most of their calls, I don't want to give a number and be wrong, but about 1/3 of them were around domestic violence.
That's amazing. It really is.
So, but at this time, 1997, you're hitting up a hard wall with responses, and it's just everything's coming back and falling on you.
I had a restraining order on it the day this happened. I had an active restraining order in place.
But, I think even in the healthcare field, 25 years ago, whatever it may be, I don't think...
We never asked about domestic violence.
Well, one, we didn't ask about it, but two, I don't think we had the education, the enlightenment we have now. I think if,
it's been brought to the forefront.
The pat response would be like, just get out of the situation, and it's much more complicated than that. And it requires a lot of, I think, assistance and help and support and timing. And the timing is important too, of course, right? So I think we've all come a long way in the medical field and probably, in policing and all that. So it's different now than it was.
Yeah. The New Bedford Police Department now has a domestic violence unit that, unfortunately, Thea didn't get to reap the benefits of that, but they do have dedicated staff now who work with victims of domestic violence, not just at the police department, but at the courthouse as well.
Yeah.
So there, unfortunately, in this country, there are probably still some police forces or
That's why
resources
I said I'm going to speak just for this
that
one.
are not as enlightened. So for
100%.
anyone listening to this podcast that maybe lives in an area where they're hitting the resistance that you did in 97, like what are you doing and what are you thinking when they're saying that stuff to you? And it's like, why am I bothering calling the cops? This is going to be my problem, I guess.
Yeah, and then you're right back into that situation again.
Right.
Because if you can't beat them, might as well join them.
And you can't throw them out. Like you can't separate from them. So what were your choices back then? Like what were you facing? And again, a 15-year-old's mind, 15, 16, 17-year-old's mind, so young, and his maturity level, how did it compare to yours?
We did what we had to do as far as maturity level. I don't think either one of us was mature at 15, 16 years old. I don't think either one of us was mature at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now you're calling the police because did it escalate for you? Did it just start out as like verbal?
Yeah, it started out with verbal and then I'm sorry's and crying and I'll never do it again, and then it'd be good for a couple of weeks and then it'll happen again. And
cycle.
The sorry's and the crying and the I'm not taking you back, get out, and then a couple of days later, baby needs diapers, okay, you got the money, come back.
That's really true, right?
Yeah.
What do you do when you have to provide?
And we did, and this went on for another baby later.
Yeah.
I had another one.
Right.
So it was a matter of 4 or 5 years before I was forced out. The tragedy, I was with him right up until 2 weeks before that incident. We were back and forth in and out of court, like the whole chaos, the whole cycle.
So when you're in and out of court, like what are you in court for? Like the charges or something
happened and I called the cops. So now he gets arrested. Now we have to go to court the next day. Do you want to put a restraining order? No, I don't want to put a restraining order. He leaves the courtroom, comes right back home. That vicious cycle.
And this is not an atypical story, right, Kayla?
No, I actually had a question. If you don't mind, how many times do you think it took you? How many times did you leave and go back? Excuse me.
Too many to count.
You don't even know, right?
I don't even know.
Where did you go to when you left?
It was usually I didn't leave the house. I would kick him out.
Okay.
because I had the kids.
When he, let's say he was arrested, let's use that scenario, and he came back, what was his reaction like? Would he
Like
be,
nothing ever happened.
like nothing happened? Would he be apologetic or angry or just kind of wash it under the rug, so to speak?
It wasn't to be spoken of.
Okay.
It didn't happen.
Yeah, it wasn't to be spoken of, and I was in too much fear to even bring it up. Like we just carried on like nothing ever happened.
During this time, I mean, obviously the police were involved. Did you reach out to anyone else? Did you reach out to friends or family? What was their reaction? Did they assist or help in any way, or was it counterproductive?
I think their reaction was that same reaction that you get from people who aren't in it. Just leave.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And then when they're telling you to just leave and you don't leave, then it's like, okay, they're gone, because they're tired of watching you go through this. So now they put space between you and your relationship with whoever it is. They put space because they no longer can see you doing what you're doing to yourself, but they don't understand it.
And
I didn't even understand it.
I mean, you're already feeling isolated, so that makes you feel even more isolated at that point. You have less connection.
Mm-hmm.
So it really becomes more complex with that,
How did you justify it in your mind?
Justify what, Nancy?
Like, I'm just like, did you know it was a wrong situation? Did you feel like you were to blame? Like, what was going through your mind?
I felt like I had a baby at 15 years old, and this is what you have to do to
deal with that. This
is what you get.
When did that start to change? Or did it?
It didn't.
Yeah.
It didn't change until when I got tired of self-destructing. This was years later.
So this is a tough question, but I'm curious about it. So a lot of times it seems that people who are in these situations, as you were in, terrible situations, they may not even understand how abnormal it is because they may have experienced that during their upbringing. Did you have an experience like that growing up, or maybe not even in your immediate family, but were you exposed to?
Yes, I was exposed. I was, like I said, I didn't know. It was normal.
It was normal. Okay.
I didn't know
anything different. Nothing to compare it to.
Yeah.
Right. It must have taken you years to really realize how this wasn't the norm, and it must have been a lot of soul searching and I suspect counseling and whatnot too.
Yes, it's a whole new world. Right. It's a whole new, for me, life now. It's a whole new world. I know that I never have to live like that again. I know that no matter what I do, beyond my mistakes, beyond my choices, that there is always somebody that loves me,
right.
That's bigger than me.
And that's empowering, I would think. Yeah. Very empowering.
Yeah, when you were still in school, at this point, did you graduate? Did you go through your senior year with?
I went through my senior year, but because I've missed so many days of school, they told me I couldn't graduate and that I would have to repeat my senior year. So what I did was I just quit and got my GED.
Right.
Okay.
But then you went on and you became a medical assistant, and you've done well.
Yes.
During that time, was there anything in your mind, like, did the teachers ever pick up on anything, or did anyone, or would it have made a difference, do you think, if someone said, hey, are you doing okay? You seem like down today, or,
No, I never talked about it. It was never talked about. Life was good.
Okay.
It was very, very much hidden for a long time.
Do you still see that today, that like people are it's not easy for people to come forward and ask for help?
Absolutely. I would say yes. I find people have a hard time even acknowledging that they need the help. Maybe.
Yeah, and one thing that I would notice, like I pretty much knew what Thea was going to say when you said that. A lot of these teachers, they're mandated reporters, and it is their job to mandate if they see abuse, but sometimes they can't report what they don't see.
Absolutely.
Right.
And what Kayla and I are seeing in the school, but this is also nationally, is a lot of children who come to school who are victims of domestic violence are getting misdiagnosed with ADHD. When
Interesting.
the fact is, just like Thea said, when you're 15 years old and you're being exposed to domestic violence, let alone being in a domestic violence relationship, you are in fight or flight.
Mhm.
So therefore, you're probably not getting your homework done. You're probably, at the next day, you might be a little restless.
You're tired.
things
You
are
were
getting-
listening to your parents argue all night. You
Yep.
were worried for your mother. This is Hassan's, it's his niche, but everything that he just said and more, because they're not focused on school. And, we go into the schools and we tell them that same thing. Maybe, you're tired and you're not getting the education that you're supposed to be getting because you're not focused on that. You're fight or flight.
Yeah, in your mind, and now you have the two kids. Are you thinking that you have to prepare and like get ready to get out of there if you have to move quick, or are you just accepting what your life was at that time?
So when the tragedy happened, my youngest daughter was only 2 months old.
Okay.
So probably a month and a half before, I put a restraining order. I was done. Like in my mind,
That was
I was done.
okay.
And the night that happened, he had broken into my house. I didn't know he was in my house.
Okay.
So I had a restraining order. I was prepared. I was mentally prepared. So this was it. And then this night came.
Can we talk a little bit about that night? I know it's going to be difficult, but do you mind?
We can talk.
Okay. So the night was the tragedy, as you mentioned.
Can you kind of walk us through that a little bit? When did you find out he was in your house?
It was the day before Valentine's Day. And of course, you get that phone call. He called. Even though I had a restraining order, I answered the phone call. And he was he wanted to take me out for Valentine's Day. This was going to be his really big apology. And I turned it down. I said, no, I'm not. I'm not doing it. I'm not going with you anywhere. We're not doing anything. And I ended up going out with a few of my friends that night. My kids went upstairs to my neighbor's house.
And how old are
They
your
were-
kids at this point?
4 and 2 months. They went upstairs to the neighbor's house. She babysat. And me and a couple of my friends went out for that night. So coming home, we all decided we're all coming to my house. I was newly single. Let's go to my house. So while I was out, apparently that's when he broke into my house. And when we all got there, he was apparently, because I didn't know at the time, he was in my daughter's closet. So he sat there listening to us females after a night out talk about anything and everything. He sat in there. It was late at night. I went upstairs, got the kids, brought them downstairs, put them in my bed with me, and went to bed. Several hours later, a couple hours later, whatever it was, I woke up to him on top of me. And from my experience, I thought he was just hitting me. I didn't know until I seen the weapon in his hand that he was stabbing me. When I realized what was going on, the first thing I thought of was my kids. And I rolled over on top of my kids. And that's how he got me in my back. Till this day, I still say it was God that gave me the power to just somehow take this grown man from a laying position, lift him up, and just throw him. my 4-year-old daughter ran upstairs to my neighbor's house, banging on the door, saying, "My daddy's hurting my mommy." If it wasn't for my daughter, I wouldn't be here. I honestly believe that. I went upstairs because I had my 2-month-old baby in my hand, and I carried her upstairs to the upstairs, and all I remember is my mother and father over me. I can hear my kids crying. And then the next thing I know, I woke up and I was in the hospital.
What were you thinking when you woke up? What were your first thoughts?
I don't even know if I had any.
Yeah.
Of course.
My whole world had been tipped upside down, and I didn't even know what to think.
Thank God your kids were okay, Thea.
Yeah. And thank God you're okay, too.
Yeah.
Mother's instinct to roll right over on him and protect him.
How many times did he stab you, Thea?
Over 15 times.
Jesus. How long were you in the hospital for, Thea?
3 days.
What did you do when you got out? How did you start putting your life back together?
I didn't. I was just on survival. I was just, that's when that self-destruction started. I didn't know how I was going to do the next 60 minutes, never mind the next month. All I knew was that I had to mother these kids.
Right.
How was your 4-year-old processing everything? Like what?
My oldest daughter, like at that time,
Yeah.
she was a rock.
Wow.
She was a rock. She was my strength. She was the reason why I was here.
Thank you for sharing that story. It's not typical that we get to hear about what happens to victims of domestic violence. Was that the last time that you saw your, at that time, partner, or did you see
No,
him
I would
after?
love to say it was.
So he was arrested, of course.
He was arrested. He was sent to jail. He was in prison. And probably 5 months after, I started visiting him.
And that's not surprising to you. Can you talk about why that's not surprising?
Yeah, I can definitely talk about it, but I think she kind of mentioned it already. And when we talk about the cycle of abuse, like Thea said, we talk about the honeymoon phase, the tension building phase, and then the episode. You know, imagine like Kayla said on the last time, it takes the average victim 7 to 9 times before they leave. And Thea said too many times and she can count. You know, imagine this person's the father of the 2 children who you love more than anything on earth. Maybe you're financially dependent on this person. Maybe you believe in your heart and in your soul that this person can be a great person because you fell in love with them at some point. I'm not just speaking for Thea, I'm speaking in general. So I think that makes it a complicated situation. And then again, when you put children into the mix, Maybe you're being selfless. Maybe you want them to have a rapport with their dad, and maybe you have to make those sacrifices.
How long was he in prison for?
I believe it was 9 years.
Okay. And tell us about your journey through that time.
It was, honestly, for about 7 of those years, it was self-destruction. It was one abusive relationship after another. It was trying to fill that void with anything and everything. Like, yeah, I didn't want to face what I really had to face. Fight or flight, survival. It wasn't living. I wasn't living.
Thea, when did that start to change? Because looking at you now, like you're just a beautiful, radiant woman.
Thank you. That changed when the day that I was at South Coast Behavioral Health. I was again in an abusive relationship, and it got so bad that I tried to slam my car into a tree because I just didn't want to be here anymore.
Of course.
And I was taken to South Coast Behavioral Health in Dartmouth, and that's what I like to say. I had a Jesus encounter.
Mm-hmm.
That day, Jesus saved my life. And the people that he's placed in my life, the women that he's placed in my life, the support system that he's placed in my life, and it gave me my identity back. He gave me my power back, that I know I never have to live like that again.
Good for you.
Mm-hmm. So there was some epiphany, it sounds like, some event that really hit home. And from that point on, it was a turning point.
It was the emotional part of it. I was healing emotionally.
Okay.
Finally.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a layer you can build on.
Yes. That was I began to find out who Thea was, because I never knew who she was.
Yeah.
Becoming a mother at 15, I never knew who
Right.
Thea was.
Right.
I began to find my identity, and the more I prayed and the more I searched, the more I found my identity as the daughter of a king. I have a meaning and a purpose. Sometimes I still don't know what that is, but it's a great adventure trying to figure it out now.
Now, how did you get hooked up with these guys?
So, my passion has always been to help women in the same situation I was. So, at my church, we have an outreach team, and I am the captain. We do all different types of outreach. Well, I was the captain of the Women's Center outreach, and where Hassan was the outreach director, that's how we became.
But she called us.
Yes.
She deserves that credit. She reached out to us, and it's been an amazing journey since.
It really has. I love being involved. I love empowering women in this situation, knowing women, men, anybody in this type of situation, know that there's a way out.
How do you empower someone and talk to someone that's feeling like you did when you were so young? Like, where do you start? Because they know everything, some of them.
Want to talk about the letters? Those are amazing.
So what we did is I had my team of women. We write encouraging letters to the women that are in the shelters, and we do prayer circles for them. I try to be able to communicate with them any way I can. Sometimes it's hard because they're in safe houses. We can't meet them, but however I can touch somebody, invite them to church, invite them for coffee, however, and just encourage them. It's like, you can't dictate, you need to do this, you need to get up. That's not, just encourage them. Just sit with them. Just listen.
Mm-hmm.
How hard is it to break someone's cycle? Like, because I imagine that they have to have that realization. Like, you can't give it to them. Like you said, you can't dictate.
No.
So
you direct them in the path of help. You direct them to the Women's Center. You encourage them to get counseling. You encourage them to sit in groups. You encourage them. Those are the things that are going to help them get it healthy emotionally first. Because when I say, if you're not healthy emotionally, you're never going to leave that situation.
Yeah, I can only imagine where you're coming from, that you have such a deep understanding of some of these women's circumstances, that you have to be helping them so graciously. I thank God that you took this path, because just thinking of the lives that you've reached out to and have changed, it's like a ripple effect.
Yes. They say, like, God will use the bad for his glory. He'll turn the bad into a good. And I see that happen for me every day. I wake up with joy in the morning. I don't longer wake up wondering, what am I going to get hit for today?
Okay.
What type of mood is that person in that I got to base my mood upon so an incident don't happen?
No more tippy-toeing.
Walking on eggshells.
I would think that if you hadn't been through this absolutely horrific experience, you wouldn't be able to help people like you've done, because you have such a level of understanding and credibility that, I'm not going to have, or Nancy's not going to have, not being in this situation ever. Although I do think there's probably things our audience who, can do to understand and help others out there, even not having personally experienced that. We can talk about that a little later, but it's if you hadn't been through that, you never would be able to do what you do and be the person that you are now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What would have helped the 15 and 16-year-old Thea?
Say that again.
What would have helped the 15 and 16-year-old Thea? Was there something that someone could have done back then?
Probably just to listen.
Listen. It's hard for people to do. A lot of times we always want to just give advice and fix problems, but listening is a big key here, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, because you hit it. Like, as soon as I'm listening to someone, I'm already thinking, how can I fix the problem? And it's really tough to be an active listener. Yeah. And just just for the sake of letting someone tell their story.
It's very hard, and I'll speak, especially from a male perspective, we always want to fix things. And it's very hard sometimes to just sit there and listen. And listening sometimes is the most important thing that you can do to help someone out.
I have 2 points. That's a very good point, because women and men do differ in that aspect, where women just want to complain and vent, and we don't want your solutions.
Right.
We don't. We just want you to hear us. That's it. That's all we're looking for. And we get a little bit more frustrated, I think, when you're giving us logical solutions, because we're like, well, that's not what we wanted.
Right.
And my second point was going back to DV. When you're working with a victim or a survivor, it's very important to not direct them, to not tell them what to do.
Sure.
Because then you're just taking back the power from them. And the whole point about it is to empower them, not take it from them.
That's a great point about the, empowering versus the opposite of
You can't, if you start telling them what to do, again, it's they're losing that power that they're trying to gain.
Right. Right.
When you talk with these girls, young ladies, and women, what's been an eye opener for you? Like, you must have been nervous when you first started, or I don't know, were you? You seem to have a very strong faith. Maybe nervous is not the right word.
I don't think I was nervous. I think it was more of I wanted to make sure I wasn't judging, that I wasn't directing, that I just wanted to make sure that I heard them, that I was listening, that I felt their pain.
And that has to be very powerful, not knowing that there's someone who understands them.
Yes.
It must strip away some of that isolation that many of these women are feeling.
Yeah, I know, because for me, I know I wouldn't talk about it because I was afraid of being judged.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's common.
Or just brushed aside like it didn't matter, So that's what I focus on. I want it to be a safe space. I want it to be a safe conversation. I want them to feel safe, and not judged.
Can you share a personal story of an interaction that you've had where you're like, yes, this was a win, without mentioning names or anything? Or just even like a little step that someone took.
I would say I was working. It was when I was working for a family shelter, and there was a lot of young girls in my situation that went there, and working in that type of atmosphere, you're never allowed to talk about yourself, what you've been through. You're like, it's kind of, you walk in the door and your other life doesn't matter. You're here to do this certain job. But I was working there, and I also was asked to speak at the domestic violence vigil that they hold every year. And I was working that night, and I asked my supervisor if I can speak, but I wanted to take the girls in the van to hear my story. And there was a lot of raising hands, and we have to go through this person and that person and this person.
Oh, gosh.
And when I got the okay to bring these girls to the vigil, and this was the first time that I had ever shared my story, that's when I knew I was doing exactly what I was supposed to be doing. I was giving back in a way that I didn't even understand. But that point, to be able to newly working in this field and trying to help young women and getting the okay to do something that's not allowed was an aha moment for me.
That's an awesome situation that you were able to share that with those people.
Yeah, can you imagine how much that meant?
Right. And you may not even know it right then. It could be something that they processed and thought about and used years later in their, for whatever life experience they were going through.
And then they can look at you and be like,
they relate more.
Look at you now, and they're like, if you can do it, that you give them that motivation, the inspiration.
Role model.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Kayla, let me ask you this question, because as a counselor, how do you empower women? Because we've talked about this a lot. It's not as simple as just, saying, hey, get out of that situation.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it's very complicated. It's a whole journey that women are going through. I say women because it's mostly women, but we know there are men that are victims
Absolutely.
of domestic violence also.
So I would say that it goes back to definitely not dictating them, not telling them what to do, suggestions maybe, if they're asking for advice, but you can't really tell them which way to go. It's up to them. They hold the power. Let them know that that's what's going on. Listen, I tell them, it sounds like you have two options. You can do this or you can do that. And it's entirely up to you which way you choose to go. It's your life. It's your choice. You're in charge. Active listening, letting them know that you're listening, not just, let them know that they're being heard. Reiterate what they've said to you. Don't take away from what they've said to you either. And,
Goals.
asking what their goals are. Thank you. Yes. So that's a great point because I missed that part entirely. The beginning of each meeting, I wouldn't say each session. When I first meet a client, I will tell them, give me a goal.
Mm-hmm.
1 goal, 2 goals, whatever goals you want to meet while we're meeting, while I have you, while you have me, while we're together. What can we do? What do you want to do? What do you want to learn? Giving them that power to let them know that that's their time. And it's about them and what they find they need and what's best for them.
Yeah. I mean, you're a trained counselor, so it's different for you than someone who is out in the community who may not have that training. Would it be reasonable to say that it would be important to listen?
Yeah.
And instead of offering, quick solutions, would it be reasonable to refer them to a center like the Women's Center in New Bedford?
So if I'm working with, you're saying like if I'm working.
So if someone is listening to this podcast and they're not in the medical field and they are struggling with how to help someone that they know who may be in
how
a
to help.
situation.
So how to help handle a DV disclosure, pretty much.
So what would you recommend they do? Because they're not trained counselors like yourself.
So I would recommend, he's laughing at me because I don't know why. We can't sit across from each other.
You got this.
Yes, I would recommend that they, first of all, if somebody that you're close with, whether or not you're close at, somebody discloses to you, first off, don't start bashing the abuser. Don't start talking, oh, well, he's a piece of, what, and things like that, because then they'll never disclose it to you again.
I see.
And they'll isolate themselves out. Same thing with never bringing it up to them. I wouldn't, if they disclose it to you and like you're dying to know, like, how are they? When was it, like, don't bring it up, but they'll bring it up when they're comfortable.
Yeah.
Especially because you don't know who might be around them and you don't want to make things more difficult for them. Believe them, listen to them, be there for them, support them, hear them, listen, active listening. I can't stress that one enough. And what that might look like is just literally reiterating what they said to you, but just so they know that you actually absorb that information, that you are hearing what they're saying, that you understand what they're going through. And you might not understand it completely, obviously, but at least that they know that there's somebody else out there that knows what they're actually going through and how they feel.
Listening is the key thing here, as you reiterated. Yeah.
I like the fact that you brought in goals because,
Yes.
These victims have been so broken down and probably their self-esteem is at a low.
Yep.
To feel like you've accomplished and you're meeting some goals that you've established,
Correct.
Gives you a sense of empowerment.
Yeah, it is. It's very empowering. And we also work with, we try to meet people where they're at, just like Kayla said, because you have to understand that some of the people we work with are still with their abuser,
Right.
the perpetrator, the batterer,
Or
depending
have
on
the
what
intent to go back.
or have the intent to go back. Sometimes I've had clients who called me from a true story from a closet. I've had clients who, work at a fast food restaurant not too far from the Women's Center and would tell their abuser that they lived with that they were working till 5 o'clock. They were really working until 3 and they'd come see me during that time. And I feel like some of the things that Kayla mentioned are important because on the other aspect, we also work with people who are in DCF care and they have their children removed. So I've had clients who called me and said, I really don't want to do counseling with you, but DCF said if I don't do counseling, I'm not going to get my kid back. We get this a lot. So I think the goal is important to say, okay, I can't mandate you to do counseling, but we know that DCF, who I used to work for, so I understand the action plan, is saying you're not going to get your children back unless you complete counseling.
XYZ.
So why don't you take the night or the day or the week and think about some goals that you would like to achieve? What does that look like? I want to learn about a healthy relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Like Thea pointed out, and I don't want to speak too much for her, but like she was saying how she witnessed abuse. We know that when we work with children who are exposed to domestic violence, they learn that the two ways to handle something are through passivity or aggressiveness. Whereas everybody at this table knows there's a whole spectrum of emotions that you can use. But if you see your parents, you see, the power and control.
Right.
And maybe they want to learn about healthy relationships. I had one client who wanted a safety plan. She wanted to come up with a whole plan to flee her abuser and run away to Maine. It's a true story, and it happened. She got all her ducks in a row. She talked to our legal department. Maybe their goal is to just learn what the difference is between emotional abuse and psychological abuse, and the different types of abuse. Those are all real examples of goals that people have come up with. And some people's goal was just to close out their case with DCF.
Mm-hmm.
So at least, like you said, it gives them something to work toward. And I think it helps us as counselors sort of have a direction when this person, they may not be so ready to talk, but we have a goal now.
Mm-hmm.
So every week they don't have to call and say, what am I going to say? All right, we're talking about healthy relationships.
So there's no real boilerplate plan. Everyone's on a different point in this journey.
Yeah.
And
I
you
was
have
just
to
going to say,
individualize it.
I've had people specifically ask to learn more about narcissists as well. So,
Okay.
I went and educated myself on narcissists so that I would be able to help my client educate herself on narcissists and how to spot red flags and things like that. What a healthy boundary is. And
So you had mentioned the financial control. So if someone's in that situation and they're at the point where they realize they have to get out and they don't have the finances or the means and they have kids, what does that look like, that roadmap, and how do you help someone?
So
like
a lot of rape crisis centers throughout the country are federally funded to help people with first, last, and security. We have a program at the Women's Center, and a lot of rape crisis facilities do have the ability to help people first, last, and security. They obviously would have to find an apartment, but that's one step that they can do. And the Women's Center and a lot of agencies across the country have residential programs, because I think the reason why we are federally funded for that is because, like, in addition to the World Health Organization determining that domestic violence is preventable, they've also realized that the financial abuse is a huge factor. I had one client who saw me for 2 separate full counseling sessions just from being a victim of financial abuse. So that's where I think that's what I believe that funding came from, is recognizing that a lot of people stay in a domestic violence relationship for finances. Especially if you're a parent, you're most likely going to put your children's needs before yours. So if it means dealing with abuse, if your children's going to have diapers and food, you're going to do so.
Yep.
Are your resources free?
All of our free, everything. Yep.
free, confidential.
Confidential. We work with people who are undocumented as well. And we don't require proof of domestic violence. There are some agencies that I'm not knocking that require an individual to furnish proof of a restraining order.
Really? They require that?
In Massachusetts, there are agencies here in Massachusetts that in order to get these services, first, last, and security, counseling, groups, legal advocacy, medical advocacy,
all of the programs that are available,
they need proof with a restraining order. But as counselors, we know that a restraining order should not be used as a cookie cutter.
It's a lot of hoops to jump through when you're looking for help.
It is.
And it that's a lot for help, and it's like he just said, it's not cookie cutter for everybody. I don't want to speak for Thea, but it sounds like that definitely didn't help her situation in the long run either.
No, like I said, I had an active restraining order.
Are restraining orders, is it any different nowadays? Or people just, they're going to do what they're going to do regardless of restraining order?
I really, maybe Thea can help me with this, but I don't think there's really that much of a difference. I think for a lot of people, it's a piece of paper. And we at the Women's Center, when you call legal advocacy, they will help you come to the conclusion on whether it's appropriate for you. I think a basic example would be, where is the batterer, the abuser, the perpetrator in their life? Okay, so if this is somebody who maybe has a history of doing sexual assaults and things like that, or maybe a criminal history, they may not be as threatened by a restraining order as somebody maybe with a 9 to 5. These are probably terrible examples, but these are real-time things that we've worked with. So it scares me a little bit to ever see a restraining order used as like a cookie cutter thing, because it could actually put the victim in more danger. Because we
And
know
another
that
thing, as far as the system's concerned, okay, so we go to court, we get this restraining order. So you granted me this restraining order because you believe I'm in an unsafe situation.
Mm-hmm.
Where's the follow-up?
Yeah, exactly. Like, are they doing rounds around your house or anything? Are they watching?
Where's the follow-up? Where's the check-in? Are you okay?
It's a piece of paper.
It's true.
Here you go.
Yeah.
It's like more of a paper trail for a legal process.
It is. Yeah, I hate to say it, but it is.
It's a good point.
Yeah, unless you unless the abuser responds to it, and like Thea said, a lot of times it could put the victim in more danger. So I recommend, if somebody is thinking about a restraining order, to call a local domestic violence agency and just get some free legal advocacy before they decide.
Thea, when we close our episodes, we usually ask one question, but I'm going to ask you two questions. Just because you're a special guest. So we usually, ask our guest, can you leave us with a message that you would like the audience to hear? And I will ask you that one. That's just a general, hey, what do you want the ending message to be? But then I'd love for you to break it down a little bit. And for those girls out there, those young girls that are struggling, or those women that are not in a good spot right now, what would your message be to them as well?
And it might be the same, but that's okay.
I think it's pretty much would be the same. Like, the message I wanted to be heard is they're not alone.
Mm-hmm.
There's help out there, and there's a better way to live.
Mm.
And to reiterate again, you can make the decision to never live like this again.
Those are great points.
That's great to close on.
Yeah.
So strong.
Yeah. This has been really an amazing experience. I'm very grateful personally that you were able to share this experience with our audience and with us. Obviously, this is not an easy thing for you to do. Thank you so much. I think that anyone who is watching this will benefit, and I'm sure there will be people out there who will see this, who will listen to your message and hopefully feel empowered.
It will make a difference.
I think it will make a difference. And why don't we give some information about how to reach out to the Women's Center in New Bedford, because I think that's key also.
Yeah, so if anybody out there is a victim of domestic violence, or they know somebody, even if you just want to call and ask, like, hey, I have a friend who's going through something, what do I do? Like Kayla said, some of the steps, I would definitely give us a call. Our number is 508-996-3343. You can just call that number. We always have a counselor who's ready to take your call.
Can you say that one more time slower?
508-996-3343.
All right. Thank you. And I want to thank Bay Coast Bank, which is just right for all of your financial needs. Visit baycoast.bank or call 508-678-7641 to learn more. Hassan, Kayla, Thea, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful experience. It's been really educational, and I really appreciate you opening up as you did on this show. And for everyone out there, thank you for watching, and we'll see you again in another week or two. And this is Chris and Nancy, the 27th Degree.
Thank you.